Zack is getting mic'd up here. The last couple of years, we've had him do a presentation on the 4th of July about the Battle of Fort McHenry and the Star Spangled Banner and the writing of it. And I asked him to do it again today. It's a message in itself, so that if I get short-timed, well, it's okay with me. But this is a very special message about the writing of our national anthem. After he is through with this presentation, he'll lead us in saying the Pledge of Allegiance and in singing the Star Spangled Banner. So pay close attention as Zack presents the Star Spangled Banner as you've never heard it before.
America, our history, is filled with so many great stories and true stories like this one. Now, we ad-lib to place all the pieces together, but there are amazing parts of our history that need to be taught, and I have a pleasure of doing so, and being blessed being part of an organization that's given me the materials and the willpower to do so. But this is the story of the Star Spangled Banner. There was a lawyer once. His name was Francis Scott Key. He penned a song most of you know. I'm sure you've heard of it. I'm sure you're aware of it. It's most sung in most of our schools. It's most of our hymn books across in our churches today. It's called the National Anthem. It is our song as an American. We go to ball games. We sit in church services, however. We sing it. It flows through our lips. It floats over our minds. But do we ever stop to realize what we're saying or what it means? The significance of it. Most of us has memorized it as a child. But we never thought about what it actually meant. Who wrote it and the story behind it. This begs me to tell you a story. Francis was a lawyer in Baltimore, Maryland. At the time, Baltimore, Maryland was the third largest city in America. And we were in a great conflict in the early 1800s with a country. It was a great war that was fought in the early 1800s. Does anybody here today know the title of that war? Little past that. Early 1800s. It was with the same country we were fighting, War of 1812. Fighting Great Britain. You see, we were a young fledgling nation at the time. America was just getting started and founded, and we had to fight with Great Britain on and off all the way through 1812. And in 1812, it all came to a head. We started with a great conflict there. It was a vicious conflict, Francis wrote. It led to capture a great amount of POWs, a great amount of prisoners on both sides. America, we had captured a bunch of British soldiers, and Great Britain had captured a bunch of American soldiers. So that led our government, American government, to make a move. President Madison said, "Let us come and negotiate for the release of these men." He sent that in a letter to the Crown, the King of England. Crown answered back to him. He said, "We will grant your negotiations, Mr. President." So the Crown sent a man out. The man's name was an admiral in the Atlantic War Fleet of the British Naval Force. The admiral's name was Admiral Alexander Cochrane. That's Cochrane spelt with an E, so Lord willing, he ain't kin to me. He came out to negotiate for the release of these men. In the belly of those warships that he came in were several of our POWs, our men captured in bondage down there in the belly of those ships. They dropped their anchor off the shore of Baltimore, Maryland. Now, they're holding these prisoners 1,000 yards offshore. They sent word on shore, "We are here ready to negotiate." President Madison sent a man out. He said, "I'm going to send a lawyer in Baltimore to meet you." The lawyer's name was Francis Scott Key. He went out there. He got a couple men. He got his aide. We're not really sure how many it was. We think he had a couple rowmen and an aide in that sloop, but he got in his sloop a small rowboat, and he went out there to negotiate for the release of these prisoners. They paddled out to the warship. The admiral welcomed him on board. He said, "Welcome, Mr. Key. We're glad you're here for negotiations." Francis, you can imagine him stepping up on the deck, shaking the admiral's hand, and starting negotiating. Now, they negotiate for some period of time. It's unclear how long it was. Some say several hours, some say several days, but we do know it was long, extended amounts of negotiation on those warships. Francis said, "Admiral, will you let me go below deck to the cargo holds and see who I'm negotiating for their release, see my men who I'm negotiating for?" Admiral said, "Sure thing, Mr. Key. Go down there and see your men." Francis went down those decks, and he got down there in the cargo hold of that ship. And you know what he saw? He wrote that he saw a cargo hold full of humanity. Men shackled in their filth, lying there so self-sacrificially for this country. And back then, the definition of a man was a man, you could be 12 years old or older to be a man. So there's a great possibility that there were 12-year-old men shackled in the belly of that ship. Francis said, "Men, I'm here negotiating for your release so that you can return to your families, return home. We're going to try to get this done for you today, men." You can imagine Francis going back up on the deck, continuing negotiations with the admiral. And they came to quite a simple agreement. For such a long negotiation, it was a one-for-one exchange. One man for one man. Every man we got, we would send a man. So when he came to this agreement with the admiral and it was approved, you could imagine how joyous he was. That he had just successfully negotiated for the release of these prisoners to return home. Little did he know Admiral Cochrane had something in store for him and for Baltimore, Maryland, and Fort McHenry later on that evening. He went down below deck. He said, "Men, I've got news for you. Tonight you're free. You're free. I've successfully negotiated for your release to return to the homeland, to return to the country that you love, to return to your wives and children. You're free." Can you imagine how happy, how jubilant those men were in that ship? And the admiral came marching down those decks to Mr. Key. He said, "Francis Key, I've got a problem." He said, "What's the problem, Admiral?" He said, "Well, come back up on the top deck. We'll discuss it up there." So they're discussing the problem. Francis said, "What's the problem, Admiral?" He said, "Well, there's nothing wrong with the negotiations." He said, "But there'll be a merely academic thing after tonight." Francis said, "What you mean, Admiral?" He said, "Well, they won't matter." He said, "Mr. Key, if you will scan the horizon of the ocean." You can imagine the Admiral handing Francis his telescope and Francis looking across that water. And you know what he saw? Several little specks out there on the water. Several little ships, he said. He said, "Admiral, I see several little ships out there on the water." Admiral says, "Well, Mr. Key, you're right that they're ships, but they're not little. That's part of the British naval war fleet. The Atlantic fleet coming here will be here by dusk to drop its anchor and to launch an attack on that fort. You see that fort ashore over there, Mr. Key?" He said, "Yes." "You mean Fort McHenry, Mr. Admiral?" He said, "Yes, Fort McHenry." He said, "We're going to remove it from the face of the earth." Can you imagine Francis in the horror? He said, "Admiral, that fort means no harm to you. It's filled with mainly families, men, and protecting their wives and their children. It means no harm to y'all. There's no reason to shell that fort, Admiral." He said, "We're going to shell the fort, Mr. Key. But don't worry, we've left them out. We've left them one way out, one way." "What is that way, Admiral?" He said, "Well, you see that rampart up there? You see a rampart was an elevated sector inside the walls of the fort. It was a mound of dirt with brick around or something. Just a high elevated sector inside the walls of the fort they could put cannons on and shoot over the wall of the fort if they needed to." But he said, "You see that center rampart over there? You see that flag that's flying on that rampart?" "Yes, what about it, Admiral?" He said, "Well, we've sent word. If they will take that flag down, the shelling will stop, the battle will be over, we'll come ashore, you'll be under British rule." He said, "If they'll take it down beforehand, Mr. Key, there will never be a battle." Francis said, Admiral, they're not going to take that flag down. See, Francis knew what the flag meant. Admiral said, so be it, Mr. Key. Then we'll remove that fort from the face of the earth as we had planned all along. It started getting dark. Dusk fell. More and more warships came in, dropping their anchors off the shore of Fort McHenry, off the shore of Baltimore, Maryland, bracing those ships, getting ready for cannon fire to rock them. You can imagine those sailors going out there, cleaning those guns, swabbing those guns out, just that swab, pop, just hitting the back of that gun, and they pull that swab back out. They got the guns all shiny, all greased up, ready to go. Admiral sends out the order, men, arm the guns. They take and fill those guns full of powder, put those cannonballs in there, get them primed and ready to go, and get those torches lit, ready to light the fuse to start firing. They look, the flag's still flying. Admiral says, fire on the fort, men. A barrage of cannons release, striking Fort McHenry. The battle has begun. He goes down and explains to the men what's going on. And Francis says, an eerie calm in between the cannon fire showed a vibration of water around the ship from the whispers of thousands of prayers coming out of the belly of that ship. The men saying, God, keep our flag flying. God, may those stars and stripes wave high. God, don't let our flag fall. You see, Francis wrote that those men were shackled in the belly of a warship controlled by the mightiest military force on the face of the earth at that time. And you know what they were praying for? The idea that they had started and helped to fight and prolong to keep it alive.
Amen.
They didn't pray, God, save us. They didn't pray, God, help us. Get us out of the ship, Lord. They said, God, keep our flag flying. You see, they didn't care what happened to them. They didn't care if they were keel-hauled, impaled, burned at the stake, shot. It didn't matter to them. They just wanted that flag to stay flying. The whole time, cannon fires releasing, batteries released on Fort McHenry. Admiral's pacing back and forth. He comes up to Mr. Key. He says, Mr. Key, your men are crazy. Why have they yet to take that flag down? Francis says, I'm reminded, Admiral, of what? What a great man once said. The man's name was General Washington, General George Washington. He said, the thing that sets the American Christian apart from any other person in the world is that he will die on his feet before he'll live on his knees.
Amen.
Admiral says, well, Mr. Key, I'm going to grant their request. They will die on their feet tonight. I want every gun trained on that flag. Shoot every gun at that rampart. The Francis goes in horror. Admiral's just ordered every gun to be trained on our flag. He goes back down below deck. He says, men, all hope is gone. The Admiral's ordered every gun to be trained on the flag. Those men say, God, keep our flag flying. The battle continues, and you know what? Oh, the rocket's red glare The bombs, they bursted in air. You know what they did? They gave proof through the night that our flag, it was still there. Francis said even the flagpole was at a crazy angle. It was shredded in tears and tattered, but it was still there.
Amen.
The men, you can imagine them in the belly of that ship yelling up, tell us where the flag is, where's the flag? He says, oh, it's still up. Francis, where's the flag? Oh, it's still up. Dawn came. The shelling grew dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. Finally, the shelling ceased, and Admiral approached Mr. Key. He said, Mr. Key, I must maintain enough munition to see us a safe passage back to England. But in other words, I've run out of ammunition to fire on your fort. I don't know what else could have happened, but Providence kept Fort McHenry tonight. See, that's what they called Providence then. That's what they called God then, was Providence. The great provider, the provision. Providence. Providence has protected Fort McHenry tonight. Mr. Key, we will honor our commitment to release these men. Go ashore and prepare to receive all your men. We will release them. Francis says, thank you, Admiral, thank you, Admiral. See, Francis is not concerned with the negotiations anymore. He began to wonder what was keeping that flag up. He gets his men, he hops in the sloop, and they row ashore. He runs over to the fort, he walks in the fort, and you know what he sees? He sees bodies blown to pieces, skulls here, arms, legs, everywhere. Puddles of blood as if it rained from the sky on the ground. And he says, men, he sees a line of men standing there doing nothing. He says, men, why don't you take these men and bury them? Why are they still here? Well, Mr. Key, you don't understand. He said, no, I don't understand. Why are these men still laying here? Why haven't they been buried yet? Mr. Key, you don't understand. Look up on the rampart there. And Francis said, what do you mean? He said, just look up on the rampart there. And Francis takes and turns and looks up on the rampart. And you know what he sees? He sees men standing there, brothers holding that flag up. Do you know, very early on in the battle, they said that a cannonball came in and struck the base of the flagpole, severing it completely in two. And men stepped up there to stand and hold it up all night, humanly. They held that flag up all night humanly. There was a line of them standing there waiting to walk into suicide. As the next cannonball came in and slaughtered the ones at the base of the flag, they would drag their bodies out of the way, and the next ones would stand up and step up to hold it up humanly all night, walking into suicide to keep that flag flying. Dawn came, and he penned the song, "Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light." This is a story of the Star-Spangled Banner. Francis C. originally wrote it as a poem, The Defense of Fort McHenry. He didn't know nothing about the Star-Spangled Banner. But we later made it into the Star-Spangled Banner, our national anthem. And when you hear this story, that's why it's in the flag code. See, the American flag should never touch the ground. because of the great sacrifice that was made to keep it off the ground. This history, this 4th of July, it is our moral responsibility to put these stories back in our history. The left-wing agenda in America today, the Democratic agenda in America today, is to remove these stories from our history, to replace them with stories of slavery, of American hate, of American shame, because they want you to feel shame for America. They don't want you to feel pride. They don't want you to feel patriotism. They want you to feel shame for America because they need to tell a new story so they can radically change our nation. I beg to differ, but I am a proud American. I'm proud of our stories.
Amen.
And what's coincidental is all the stories of American shame, the stories of slavery. They failed to leave out one critical part, that they were the ones that kept the slaves, and that Abraham Lincoln, the founder of the Republican Party, is the one that abolished slavery. So let's tell the whole story if we're going to tell it. But they want to teach this to our children so they can feel shame for America, so they don't want it to exist. What do you think about the football players that kneel on the field when they wave that flag? It's a disgrace that is allowed on this ground after what's been sacrificed for that flag. Ronald Reagan said, our national anthem, is one that ends with a question. Every generation that must answer that question. Or the land of the free and the home of the brave. Is this the land of the free and the home of the brave? I dare say it is. Remember the story of the Star-Spangled Banner. Would you all please stand? Attention. Salute. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.